Recording. So, welcome. We are going to begin our study of Ecclesiastes, which is in Hebrew is called Kohelet. And we're going to begin by reading what I think is a pretty good article in Wikipedia. And it may take us a session or two, even just to get through the Wikipedia article. And then, as we have read some other books in our Monday night sessions, I'm just going to paste them into PowerPoint and look at commentaries, and we can discuss it the way we study Torah. We'll read it line by line. Anybody have any thoughts on Ecclesiastes before we start? And I'll give some of my own sort of introductory thoughts, and it probably repeating what we'll read in Wikipedia, but your experience.
Is it when as I said, when I studied it with you many years ago, I had the feeling that it is very much like telling a future of our like the Israelites or this,
Oh, that's interesting.
the Hebrews.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see as we study it. There is a legend, of course, that this was written by King Solomon, and the text make it clear that it's much later than King Solomon's time.
Yeah.
The way they date these books often is by the Hebrew language. I mean, think about how English changes over just a few hundred years. Well, Solomon, is living. Let's see, when would Solomon be living? Probably 1,000 years ago, roughly 1,000 BCE. This book is probably written sometime around 200 or 300 BCE. So 700 or 800 years. Hebrew changes. And I think as most of us know, Aramaic starts to be spoken. So you start seeing Aramaic style endings and there's a lot of Hebrew language which you only find in later books. So that helps you date it later and later. And then you read some commentaries and other books that seem to be aware of Ecclesiastes. So that gives you sort of a limit on how young the book is.
Is this the same thing like some people say that the Torah was written by several people?
That's actually it's a different story. I mean, it's different because with the Torah, it's similar in that we see different styles of writing.
Yeah.
So in the different books of the Torah and different sections of the books, to make it very simple, in some areas we see God referred to as Elohim, and in other books we see God referred to as Yud He Vav He Hashem. So scholars, say that those are different authors, or at least different people writing down the stories. But there's a separate issue about dating the books. And one of the ways these books are dated is by examining the language. So if you have for example, if you're reading some English novel and it refers to somebody sending a fax, well, that's going to tell you, that it wasn't Shakespeare, right? And in the same way, we see language in these texts, which we know are later words. They're loan words, sometimes from Aramaic, sometimes they're loan words from Greek. One of the ways that, I know we've discussed this, that the Zohar, which is, traditionally thought to be written in Mishnaic times in the 3rd century Common Era, but we know it was written down much later than that by Spanish scholars, is that we see Spanish words creeping into the text of the Zohar. So that's a pretty good indication that it's written later. So anyway, so you can almost call this textual archaeology, which I find very interesting. But there is a tradition that Solomon is the author of at least 3 of the books of the Torah. I don't think scholars agree with any of these, but in his youth, Solomon writes Song of Songs. And one way that you know this is that the opening of that book says the Song of Song, which I think it says, which is Solomon's. And then and the Song of Songs, I should really double check that. But in the Song of Songs, it's basically erotic love poetry. So it's appropriate for a young king to write. And there are some theories that if you're rich and wealthy, you can get lots of women. Since I am neither rich nor wealthy, nor am I the beneficiary of lots of women, having discovered that there is too much of a good thing. That so the tradition is Solomon wrote this, and it's about a king in Israel and so on. And then the tradition is that Solomon, in his midlife, in his wisdom, writes the Book of Proverbs, which is basically wisdom literature and pithy sayings about life and so on. And then the tradition then is that Solomon, in his old age, writes Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. And as you'll see, Kohelet is a mixture of so many different kinds of ideas, and some of it is is kind of depressing, and sounds like it's written by an old man who is you know frustrated with the fact that even though he may be a king and wealthy, that when he dies, his fate is still going to be the same as a dog's. And it's a very famous line from Kohelet. So Kohelet is not an easy book to understand, an easy book to read. I'm just looking at this is a JPS commentary on Ecclesiastes,
Ooh.
and the introduction is 38 pages to the
Oh
book.
gosh.
And as you see, I love this book. I actually gave my collection to a rabbinic student. But the way this book, see if I can show it to you. The way this book reads, you have a little bit of Hebrew, English translation, and then a lot of commentary. So if you like commentary, and basically what I do is as I'm preparing for these classes, I'm reading that and inserting what I think is the most interesting commentary. I can't find my copy, but Harold Kushner wrote a book which the title is, I'll have to look it up. I bet Charlotte can find it before I can even think of it, is something like when you have all you ever wanted and it's still not enough, or words to that effect. And it's a book by Harold Kushner. You may know that Harold Kushner's most famous book, which is When Bad Things Happen to Good People, is really inspired as a commentary on the book of Job. And then this other book, When All You've Ever Wanted Is Still Not Enough, is inspired by the book of Ecclesiastes. And
Is the woman rabbi in San Francisco, is that his daughter? Her
oh,
last name
you talking about Noah Kushner?
is her name Noah? Yeah.
Well, anyway, there is a rabbi named Noah Kushner, and it's not Harold Kushner's daughter; it's Larry Kushner's daughter.
Okay.
And I met her. I know her. She
Okay.
actually served the congregation in Camarillo a few years before I did as a
Mhm.
student. Yes. So I don't know that Harold has a daughter. I'm pretty sure he does not have a daughter. The
I
other,
know her last name is Kushner, and I know that her father is a rabbi.
have you met her?
She comes online occasionally with
Oh, okay.
Rabbi Feinstein at
Okay.
Valley Beshalom.
Okay. She's kind of short and
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah. So
she
Cheryl
has
just,
What about
a
the
congregation called, I don't know, the Kitchen, I think it's
yes,
called.
yes, that is Noah Kushner.
Okay.
what
And
about
it's Larry Kushner's daughter. And
Okay.
the book Cheryl mentioned, When All You've Ever Wanted Isn't Enough, A Search for the Life That Matters. And it's by Harold Kushner, not Larry Kushner. Very, very good book.
$9 on Amazon.
Yeah, usually I wind up ordering it, and then just before it comes, I find my copy somewhere around the house. But it wouldn't be the worst thing that happened.
but Trump's son-in-law is the same family?
I'm sorry?
Trump's Trump's son-in-law.
The
Kushner.
Jared
Oh,
Kushner.
no, yeah. So he is also named Kushner. I am not aware of any connection. Kushner is not that uncommon a name. There's another Rabbi Kushner, another Reform rabbi who, to the best of my knowledge, is no relation at all. But yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so let's jump in. I'm going to do a screen share. Here we go. So this is, I'll read a little bit of the introduction as we get into it. And it says, yeah, so Ecclesiastes, and they give you the pronunciation, is one of the Ketuvim, the writings of the Hebrew Bible, and part of the wisdom literature of the Christian Old Testament. Remember, the Hebrew Bible is in 3 sections. It's called the Tanakh. The T is for Torah. The Nun is for Nevi'im, which means prophet. And the Ch is for Ketuvim, which means the writings. The title commonly used in English is a transliteration of the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Kohelet. It's spelled lots of different ways. An unnamed author introduces the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So that's a big hint as to why many people think the author would be Solomon, because basically Solomon is the only king, son of David, that retains his kingship for a long time. And I think he's a successor to David. I don't think there are any other kings of Israel that are a son of David. Now, in theory, he could be son of David, 200 or 300 years later, because it would say, Ben David. So, when we sing about Eliyahu Hanavi, in Mashiach Ben David, it just could mean the line of David, but it's often associated with Solomon. And he doesn't use his own voice again. This is the unnamed author until the final verses, where he gives his own thoughts and summarizes the statements of Kohelet. The main body of the text is ascribed to Kohelet. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but basically there's an author that says, this is the words of a guy named Kohelet, and then immediately it'll say, in English, common translation, vanity of vanity, says Kohelet, all is vanity. And we can probably have an entire session on what the word hevel means. And we will discuss it, because vanity is probably not a very good translation, particularly when we think of the modern meaning of vanity. Oh, here we go. Kohelet proclaims, chapter 1, verse 2, vanity of vanity, all is futile. The Hebrew word hevel, meaning vapor or breath, can figuratively mean unsubstantial, vain, futile, or meaningless. In some versions, vanity is translated as meaningless to avoid the confusion with the other definition of vanity. I always like to glance at the footnotes. Given this, the next verse presents the basic existential question with which the rest of the book is concerned. What profit can we show for all our toiling under the sun? And in this extensive commentary, there's a couple of words that we see repeated in Kohelet over and over again. One is vanity, one is profit, one is toil, and then we often have this phrase, tachat hashemesh, under the sun. This phrase expresses that the lives of both the wise and foolish people all end in death. In light of this perceived meaningless, he suggests that human beings should enjoy the simple pleasures of daily life, such as eating, drinking, and taking enjoyment in one's work, which are gifts from the hand of God. The book concludes with the injunction, fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the duty of all mankind, since every deed will God bring to judgment for every hidden act, whether good or evil. According to Michael Kogan and others, it is a controversial, unorthodox, and subversive book. Just read one more line. According to rabbinic tradition, the book was written by King Solomon. Patty, I am going to mute you because there's sound in the background. According to rabbinic tradition, the book was written by King Solomon, who there's his reign roughly 1000 BCE beginning, and it looks like about 40 years in his old age. But the presence, of Persian loanwords like pardes for orchard and pitgam for sentence and Aramaicisms point to a date no earlier than 450 BCE, while the latest possible date for its composition is 180 BCE. I think you're all familiar with the phrase BCE, before the Common Era. And this is typically the name given to this period is post-exilic. So you have the exile into Babylon, which is like 586 is when the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. About 50 years later, the Israelites are allowed to return. So you're talking, maybe around 500 or so BCE. And you have this period which is called post-exilic. Okay. And Joanne, are you up to reading?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So
Forgive
let's.
me the other night. I have floaters intermittently in my right eye, so I know there
Oh,
was.
I have them
Okay.
too. It's
So I wanted to explain that to you.
okay.
All right. Ecclesiastics is a phonetic transliteration of the Greek word
Ecclesiastes, presumably.
ecclesiastics, which in the
Septuagint.
Septuagint translates the Hebrew name of its stated author, Kohelet.
Okay,
The
let me
Greek-
just comment because I always want to comment on this. The Septuagint is the Jewish translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, because in the Hellenistic era, most folks were speaking Greek, and just like now we want to read our Bibles in English, a lot of Jews wanted to read the Bible in Greek. So about 200 BCE, the Bible is translated into Greek, and that translation is called the Septuagint, and there's a lot that derives from it. So when they translated the word Kohelet, they translated it into a Greek word, Ecclesiastes. Jim.
I've often wondered, I know it's the Hebrew translation into Greek, but how could originally it's in Hebrew and it's translated into Greek. So what
Yes.
does it mean, the Hebrew translation into Greek? When the Hebrew wasn't a translation, that's how it was written
No,
originally, wasn't it?
no. I'm using. It's just, yeah. So I probably should be more careful the way I say that,
Oh, okay.
express this. So yes, the original is Hebrew. The an early translation is, and an influential translation is to Greek. There is a myth that I don't believe for a minute that there were 70 separate scholars that were each given a Hebrew Bible and told to translate the Bible into Greek, and they came up with the absolutely identical Greek translation. So therefore, it was divinely inspired, and therefore you don't have to read the Bible in Hebrew. You can just read it in Greek. And I think that tremendously influences the development of Christianity, because it's very clear that whenever in the New Testament they are quoting prophets and so on, they are working from a Greek translation. Because if they were working from a Hebrew translation, it wouldn't come out exactly the same. And of course, the New Testament is written in Greek, the same language of the Septuagint. And the reason it's called the Septuagint is because of the word 70.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is the Greek translation goes into Latin?
So the Greek translation is about 200 BCE. About 500 or 600 years later, you have a translation called the Vulgate, which is into Latin by St. Jerome, which is the first Christian translation. And scholars that I know and trust would say that the translators into Latin were knowledgeable in both Greek and Hebrew. They weren't simply only working with the Greek.
I don't know if that is true, but I heard from several sources that the hierarchy of the church learns Hebrew wherever they learning. I don't know if that's true or not.
So when I talk to priests, and certainly Catholic priests, and I talk to other ministers, they usually have had some very brief introduction to Hebrew. So at least they are exposed to the idea of Hebrew. But as you know, it takes more than just a brief exposure to be able to, to really work with the language. And I say this as someone who studied Hebrew a lot, and I don't consider myself, competent to reevaluate translations. But yes, I mean, I would say the scholars of the church would be cognizant of Hebrew. Okay. So we got through a whole sentence.
Why we use the translate from Greek. We don't have the original that go to the original.
You're saying we don't have the original Hebrew? Is that the question you're asking?
Yes.
No, well, the question is, what do you mean by the original? So the oldest Hebrew texts that
Yes.
we have are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we have some of every book of the Bible in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when we compare the Dead Sea Scroll Hebrew text with what is called the Masoretic Hebrew text, which is the text that we all use, there are some differences. So text changes over time, because remember, before Gutenberg, if you owned a book, someone physically copied the book. So you're going to have scribal errors. You're going to have scribal corrections where something clearly doesn't make sense. So the scribe will fix it, even though in theory, he is only supposed to be copying it. So we do have ancient Hebrew texts that are probably around the same age as the Greek translation, and the same issue exists in the Greek translation. I mean, you have old Greek texts, and then you have more modern Greek texts, and they're probably not identical. So that's a whole area that I find interesting, but I'm not particularly knowledgeable. There are other translations of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic, which are probably older than these. They're called targums. Targum, I think, is the Hebrew word, maybe an Aramaic word for translation. And so you have pretty ancient translations of the Bible into Aramaic. We know that when Ezra, the scribe, would read the text of the Torah to the populace, he would translate it into Aramaic. And we do have existing translations of the into Aramaic, and they are really more commentaries, or they're as much commentary as translation. The whole world of translation is utterly fascinating, but we should at least try and get one more sentence in. So, Joanne, I think we're right here.
Yeah,
The Greek
the
word
Greek
derives.
word derives from ecclesia, assembly, as the Hebrew word derives from kahal, assembly. But while the Greek word means member of an assembly, the meaning of the original Hebrew word it translates is less certain. As Strong's Concordance mentions, it is a female active participle of the verb kahal in its simple paradigm, a form not used elsewhere in the Bible and which is sometimes understood as active or passing, depending upon the verb. So that kohelet would mean female assembler in the active case recorded as such by Strong's Concordance, and female assembled member of an assembly in the passive case as per the Septuagint translators. According to the majority understanding today, the word is more general, mishkal, form than a literal participle, and the intended meaning of kohelet is the text is someone speaking before an assembly, hence teacher or preacher. This was the position of the Midrash and of Jerome.
Jerome is the translator into Latin. Yeah, this is pretty technical issues with translations. I sort of even understand it. So you have the ending elet is a feminine ending. I'm trying to think of an example of it. I should be able to come up with one, but I can't at the moment. So there's interesting questions here, and but the tradition certainly understands the kahal is a very common Hebrew word. It means an assembly or a congregation, and so the translation teacher or preacher is probably as good as any.
Commentators struggle to explain why a man was given an apparently feminine name. According to Isaiah of Trani, he authored this work in his old age when he was weak like a woman, and therefore he received a feminine name, an opinion likewise held by Johann Simonis. According to Salmon ben Yeroham, this is because even as a woman births and raises children, Koheleth revealed an organized wisdom. According to Yefet ban Ali and later Abraham ibn Ezra and Joseph ibn Kaspi, he ascribed this activity to his wisdom, and because wisdom is female, he used a feminine name. This last opinion is accepted by a wide variety of modern scholars, including Christian David Ginsburg.
So the wisdom, the Hebrew word for wisdom is chokhmah, and the ending, like yeled, yelda, is a feminine ending. So since wisdom has a feminine, is grammatically feminine, that's at least one theory on why Kohelet would be feminine.
Structure. Ecclesiastes is presented as the biography of Kohelet or Kohelet. His story is framed by the voice of the narrator, who refers to Kohelet in the third person and praises his wisdom, but reminds the reader that wisdom has its limitations and is not man's primary concern. Kohelet reports what he planned, did, experienced, and thought, but his journey to knowledge is, in the end, incomplete. The reader is not only to hear Kohelet's wisdom, but to observe his journey towards understanding and acceptance of life's illustrations and uncertainties. The journey itself is important.
Rabbi,
It's life's, hold on, life's frustrations, not illustrations. And that's an important difference.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Erwin, go ahead.
I think I find similarity because a lot of people, disagree with me. But this sentence, but his journey to knowledge is in the end incomplete. I think it's the same thing with the Torah. We can study Torah every day and every year, and our studies is never complete.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And we don't. Well, I just wanted to make one comment. There's actually a lot of controversy about why the book was included, because it is sort of so depressing, and one of the lessons is eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you're going to die, and I think at one point he says a live dog is better than a dead king. So it's not what you'd expect to find in the Bible, but at the very end of the book, there is sort of a pious ending. I'm just looking now at the very ending of the book. Is that when all is said and done, revere God and observe his commandments, for this applies to all mankind, that God will call every creature to account for everything unknown, be it good or bad. So it has a very pious ending. And of course, you might guess that scholars believe that somebody else added that ending. And that gave the rabbis who are deciding which books are in the Bible and which books shouldn't be in the Bible, the courage to put it in the Bible. And also, of course, because it's attributed to King Solomon. So that's another reason that you would think that it would be put in the Bible.
The Jerusalem Bible divides the book into two parts, Ecclesiastes and chapters 7 to 12, each commencing with a separate prologue. Few attempts to uncover an underlying structure to Ecclesiastes have met with any widespread endorsement. Among them, the following is one of the most influential.
And we can just look at it. I mean, I don't think we necessarily have to read it.
Okay.
So they're trying to discover some sort of pattern and order to it. Whoa! Oh, that's early. Okay. In the section, but let's continue with despite.
Okay. Despite the acceptance by some of this structure, there have been many criticisms, such as that of Fox. Addison G. writes, proposed structure has no more effect on interpretation than a ghost in the attic. A literary or rhetorical structure should not merely be there. It must do something. It should guide readers in recognizing and remembering the author's train of thought.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is probably Everett Fox.
Verse 1:1 is a superscription, the ancient equivalent of a title page. It introduces the book as the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Most, though not all, modern commentators regard the epilogue as an addition by a later scribe. Some have identified other statements as further additions intended to make the book more religiously orthodox. e.g., affirming God's justice and the need for piety. It
I'll
has
take
been
a quick-
proposed that the text is composed of three distinct voices. The first belongs to Kohelet as prophet, the true voice of wisdom, which speaks in the first person, recounting wisdom through his own experience. The second voice is of Kohelet, the king of Jerusalem, who is more didactic and thus speaks primarily in second person imperative statements. The third voice is that of Epilogist, the writer of the epilogue, who speaks proverbially in the third person. The epilogist is most identified in the book's first and final verses. Kyle R. Greenwood suggests that Ecclesiastes should be read as a dialogue between these voices following the structure.
We can take a deep breath, and now I think I'll read a little bit. So, summary: the 10-verse introduction in verses basically 2 to 11 are the words of the frame narrator. They set the mood for what is to follow. Kohelet's message is that all is meaningless. Just want to see. Okay, that's commentary. This distinction first appeared in the commentaries of Samuel ibn Tibon and Aaron ben Joseph of Constantinople, who died in 1230, and this guy died in 1320. The word Ibn Samuel Ibn Tibon, that's interesting. There's his book. A Jewish philosopher, lived in Provence in France. Okay, interesting. Ibn is Arabic. It means the son of. So in Hebrew we would say, Shlomo ben David, or my Hebrew name is Moshe ben Hanan, but in Arabic it's Ibn, and the great grammatical scholars were Arabic experts. So after the introduction, time comes the words of Kohelet. As king, he has experienced everything and done everything, but concludes that nothing is ultimately reliable, as death levels all. Kohelet states that the only good is to partake of life in the presence, for enjoyment is from the hand of God. Everything is ordered in its time, and people are subject to time, in contrast to God's eternal character. The world is filled with injustice, which only God can adjudicate. God and humans do not belong in the same realm, and it is therefore necessary to have a right attitude before God. People should enjoy, but should not be greedy. No one knows what is good for humanity. Righteousness and wisdom escape humanity. Kohelet reflects on the limits of human power. So, all people face death, and death is better than life. But people should enjoy life when they can, for the time may come when no one can. The world is full of risk. He gives advice on living with risk, both political and economic. Kohelet's words finish with an imagery of nature languishing and humanity marching to the grave. And here's probably the most famous lines from Kohelet. And so this is King James translation, chapter 3. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose, every heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend or tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. And I think I told the story once. I read this part of Kohelet, L'chozman ve'et l'chol chafetz tachat hashamayim. Anyway, I read, certainly in English, at every funeral I conduct. And I once had someone come up to me afterwards and say, boy, it's so interesting how the poem you read is borrowed from the music of the birds. I thought that was pretty funny. Jerry.
Yeah, that is. I'm curious why he would state not knowing, but that death is better than life? Really?
Yes, I'm curious too. And so as we study this text, so anybody want to hazard in what ways is death better than life?
A life that is very difficult, like a Holocaust.
Well, I'm in pain, and sometimes I think that too, physically. I would feel the pain, but it's a trade-off. So I bite the bullet.
Right, right. So you don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm not asking you to agree with it. You know, I think I once read Dennis Prager made a comment once that in some ways people who are not rich are better off than people who are rich. And what his point was, when you're rich and you can afford anything you want and you're still unhappy, it's kind of hopeless. I mean, that's the title of Harold Kushner's book, When All You Ever Wanted Isn't Enough. But when you're not so rich, at least you can convince yourself that if I only get more money, then everything will be great. So, and I get the sense, and I must admit, it's been a long time since I've studied this book, but I get the sense that here you have a powerful king of Israel in Jerusalem who pretty much has everything that he wants, and he's still frustrated because I guess because his body is failing him if he's in old age.
Yeah.
And so I mean it is a book. Whether the book is depressing, we can all judge after we've read it. But it's certainly the book is written by someone who is depressed. And you know, I should add this to my list that if there had been psychotropic medications in the time of the authorship of the Bible, it may be a very different book. I will leave to Cheryl for a professional opinion on that. Jim.
This gives me a desire to find out why the various books of the Bible were added and why others weren't. The last class you talked about Jubilee not being added,
Yeah.
and this is in here, and it says death is better than life when everything else in the Bible says, I put before you life and death, you're to choose life.
I
So,
don't know that everything else in the Bible says that, but certainly that is a
well,
recurring theme, the embrace of life. You know,
I
absolutely.
well,
And with some of the books, we can actually read the discussion that the rabbis had about why certain books were in and why certain books were out. So, for example, the Song of Songs, which is erotic love poetry, we studied that once, you know, in this very
yeah.
spot. And it doesn't, you know, it talks a lot about sex and breasts and kissing and hair and, you know, and it's very sensual, very sexual. And it never once mentions marriage. It never once mentions childbearing, um, or anything you would expect to find in a book of the Bible. So, of course, both the rabbis and the church interpret it as an allegory of the love between God and Israel, and the church between, I think, you know, the church and I don't know, Jesus and the church. I really don't remember. That's your job to remember that stuff, not mine, Jim. But both are embarrassed to admit that it really is just erotic love poetry. So it gets in. And the other book that, you know, we know doesn't get in is the books of Maccabees. And there, I think it's political. I think the rabbis didn't want to encourage people to revolt against Rome because we saw how badly that turned out. And so all of the books and what the Catholic Bible, and it's also the Greek Orthodox Bible and Russian Orthodox Bible, called the Apocrypha, those are all Jewish books which were part of the Septuagint. They were translated along with the other Jewish books. But the rabbis, you know, in the early Talmudic period, didn't include them in the canon, didn't include them in the Bible. I often, you know, just jokingly say that the church never got the memo that the rabbis were excluding these books, so they were included as the Apocrypha, And of course, the Protestants, once they realized what happened, they said if the Catholics included it and the rabbis didn't, the Catholics must have screwed up yet again. That's a recurring theme of the Protestant. So in a Protestant Christian Bible, you don't have any of the Apocrypha. You have exactly the same books that you have in a Hebrew Bible. Okay, I'm going to read this last paragraph here. The frame narrator returns. Oh, I think we said this, right? Yes, I think I read that. Maybe not. The frame
No.
narrator returns with an epilogue. The words of the wise are hard, but they are applied as the shepherd applies goads and pricks to his flock. The ending of the book sums up its message: fear God and keep his commandments, for God will bring every deed to judgment. Some scholars suggest that these words were an addition by a more orthodox author than the original writer, that the epilogue was added later, was first proposed by Samuel ibn Tibbon. Others think it was likely the work of the original author. So we have a little time, so let's get into.
Okay, so Rabbi,
Yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, was he a philosopher or a prophet?
There's certainly not a Jewish tradition that Kohelet was a prophet. And in fact, as I was just glancing at the introduction to this JPS commentary, they said that this book is really the only true philosophical book in the Hebrew Bible, that Kohelet is the only philosopher. So I would say the author of this commentary, let's see, what's his name? Oh, Fox. Yeah, I wonder if it's Everett Fox or another Fox. Well, this is Michael V. Fox. But this commentator, this scholar, clearly says that Kohelet was a philosopher. It'd be
Okay,
interesting to know
because
if the Muslims consider him a prophet. I really don't know.
because the King Solomon was surrounded by prophets. He had discussions with prophets.
None immediately come to mind, but I won't dispute it.
Yeah, and also the other thing is, according to Kohelet, I think happiness is a fleeting moment. You can't, that's one of the messages, I think, in the book. So you
Yeah,
better be
in fact,
happy.
the opening of the book, which is Hevel Chevelim Amar Kohelet, Hevel Chevelim Hakol Hevel. Everything is Hevel. It's actually not Hevel,
Yeah.
it's with a hey, it's not a chet. Everything is Hevel. So now the question is, what is Hevel? And this commentator prefers, let's see, vapor of vapors. People say utter vanity, utter futility. It's an interesting comment that you've heard the story of Cain and Abel. You've heard the story?
Yeah.
Well, Abel's name in Hebrew is Hevel. It's the same word. And and people have commented that the only role of Abel in Genesis is to be murdered by Cain. So he's really not a substantial character, as is, other characters in the Bible. So I think I can't remember exactly how you put it, Erwin, but I think I agree with you with your basic idea that Kohelet is saying it's all futile, it's all fleeting, it's a breath of nothingness. I don't know that I agree with that, by the way, but I think that's what Kohelet is saying.
That's the message.
Oops, I just lost my thing. Okay, so I'm going to read a little more and then we'll break. The book takes its name from the Greek Ecclesiastes, a translation of the title by which the central figure refers to himself. Kohelet meaning something like one who convenes or addresses a kahal, kahal being the Hebrew word for a congregation or a group of people. According to rabbinic tradition, Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon in his old age. Curious as to Whoops, yeah, there's a scholar Brown. An alternative tradition is that Hezekiah and his colleagues wrote Isaiah, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. Probably means simply that the book was edited under Hezekiah. But critical scholars have long rejected the idea of a pre-exilic origin. So pre-exilic would mean before 586 BCE. In Ecclesiastes, the author never says the name Solomon, but he does say that he is the son of David, who is king in Jerusalem, and that he is fantastically rich and wise. In other words, he is claiming to be Solomon without using his name. Can't resist looking at. Okay, other commentators. According to Christian tradition, the book was probably written by another Solomon. Gregory of Nyssa wrote that it was written by another Solomon. And this guy, Didymus the Blind, wrote that it was probably written by several authors. The presence of Persian loanwords and numerous Aramaicisms point to a date no earlier than 450 BCE, while the latest possible date is 180 BCE, when the Jewish writer Ben Sira quotes from it. The dispute of whether Ecclesiastes belongs to the, I don't even know how to say that word. Oh, let's see, when you go over it, as a different empire or Hellenistic periods, earlier or later part of this period, revolves around the degree of Hellenization, influence of Greek culture and thought. Scholars arguing for a Persian date hold that there's a complete lack of Greek influence. Those arguing for a Hellenistic date argue that it shows internal evidence of Greek thought and social setting. So if you want to have a glimpse of what the world of biblical scholarship is like, just imagine entire books and classes on these ideas. It's, I think it's, clearly I glanced at this article. I didn't read it to myself out loud. It's pretty detailed. Also unresolved is whether the author and narrator of Kohelet are identical. Ecclesiastes regularly switches between the third person quotations of Kohelet and first person reflections on Kohelet's words, which would indicate the book was written as a commentary on Kohelet's parables rather than a personally authored repository of his sayings. Some scholars have argued that the third person narrative structure is an artificial literary device along the lines of Uncle Remus. I am not a scholar of Uncle Remus. Although the depiction of Kohelet in chapter 12 seems to favor a historical person whose thoughts are presented by the narrator. It has been argued, however, that the question has no theological importance. I bet that's Fox. Nope. One scholar, Ronald Murphy, has commented that Kohelet himself would have regarded the time and ingenuity put into interpreting his book as one more example of the futility of human effort. I think Kohelet has this line, that there are many books, and I can't remember exactly what it says about that, but I think that's another comment. I'll read about genre and setting. Ecclesiastes has taken literary form from the Middle Eastern tradition of the fictional autobiography, in which a character, often a king, relates his experiences and draws lessons from them. Often self-critical, Kohelet likewise identifies himself as a king, speaks of his search for wisdom, relates his conclusion, and recognizes his limitation. The book belongs to the category of wisdom literature, the body of biblical writings which give advice on life, together with reflections on its problems and meanings. Other examples include the book of Job, Proverbs, and some of the Psalms. Ecclesiastes differ from other biblical wisdom books in being deeply skeptical of the usefulness of wisdom itself. Commentator. Ecclesiastes, in turn, influences the deuterocanonical works, Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach, both of which contain vocal rejections of the ecclesiastical philosophy of futility. I think deuterocanonical, let's see what they say, meaning of or pertaining to or constituting a second canon. Certain books and passages considered by the canonical books of the Old Testament, Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox, and Oriental. So I'm guessing they're talking about the Apocrypha. Jim, do you know offhand, is The Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach are in the Catholic Bible. Does that ring a bell? A book in some Christian biblical canons, books in the Septuagint, and Sirach, Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, is a Jewish literary work, originally written in biblical Hebrew. So yeah, so I think these are probably apocrypha. Wisdom was a popular genre in the ancient world, where it was cultivated in scribal circles and directed toward young men who would take up careers in high officialdom and royal courts. There is strong evidence that some of these books, or at least sayings and teachings, were translated into Hebrew and influenced the book of Proverbs. And the author of Ecclesiastes was probably familiar with examples from Egypt and Mesopotamia. He may have been influenced by Greek philosophy, specifically the schools of Stoicism, which held that all things are fated, and Epicureanism, which held that happiness is best pursued through the quiet cultivation of life's simple pleasures. I'm going to read one more section. Canonicity. The word canon actually comes from a word for a ruler, an architect's rule. It's basically, if it's in the canon, it's part, when applied to the Bible, it's in the Bible. And we even talk about the canon of English literature, which books are sort of essential if you study English literature. I was disappointed to find that my book didn't make it quite on that list, but I'm still checking. Canonicity. Through many earlier theologians, including Augustine, though many earlier theologians, including Augustine, raised no concerns regarding Ecclesiastes' position or consistency within the canon, the book's presence in the Bible has been considered a puzzle to some modern scholars. One argument advanced in earlier times was that the name of Solomon carried enough authority to ensure its inclusion. However, other works that appeared with Solomon's name were excluded, despite being more orthodox than Ecclesiastes. Let's see what they say here. Okay, that's it. Another was that the words of the epilogue, in which the reader is told to fear God and keep his commandments, made it orthodox. But all later attempts to find anything in the rest of the book that would reflect this orthodoxy have failed. A modern suggestion treats the book as a dialogue in which different statements belong to different voices, with Kohelet himself answering and refuting orthodox opinions. But there are no explicit markers for this in the book, as there are, for example, in the book of Job. Yet another suggestion is that Ecclesiastes is simply the most extreme example of the tradition of skepticism, but none of the proposed examples match Ecclesiastes for sustained denial of faith and doubt in the goodness of God. Martin Shields, in his 2006 book, The End of Wisdom, a reappraisal of the historical and canonical function of Ecclesiastes, summarized it that, in short, we don't know why or how this book found its way into such esteemed company. I, for one, love the idea that a book which raises very difficult issues and almost seems to be anti-orthodox still makes it into the canon. To me, it is symbolic. I'm going to stop the sharing.
Yeah.
To me, it is symbolic of the idea that we wrestle with these things. And certainly it's true in Judaism. The focus in Judaism is not so much what you believe about the grand scheme of things, but what you do. The doing the commandments, kind of the end of this book. I think one of the things that Kushner hits on as the overriding conclusion of the book is, share your life with someone you love and enjoy things in moderation. Because maybe I'm adding my own thought here that it's life is short and enjoy it while you have it. Yeah. Henry points out canon refers to authoritative. It's the same idea. What's officially in rather than what is not so officially in.
I think Kohelet never gave me the impression that even for a minute he denies God. he strongly believes God, but he challenges the certain aspect what God tells, maybe in the Torah. I don't know if he read the Torah or not.
Well, so the question would be whether
But the last sentence, what you read, or last word, that he is doesn't substantiate God or something like
well,
that.
he said I'll pop it up again. Oops. Yeah, he says right here that none of the proposed examples match Ecclesiastes for sustained denial in faith and doubt in the goodness of God.
Yeah,
So he may not be, there's an interesting issue here, and I think we find it also in Job. Job doesn't deny the existence of God. He denies that God is just
yeah,
because Job knows he is suffering unjustly. So he
yeah,
challenges God on the subject of whether God, you could say, is good and just. But he certainly doesn't deny that God is powerful and doesn't
yeah.
deny the existence of God.
But Kohelet does not challenges God. He just says that that life is very difficult, but God created life and all that kind of thing. And is it? I think it's in Kohelet that he tells. I don't know which chapter is it that people are coming with the big bird in. To the promised land or something like that. And
No, I have no idea what you're talking
yeah,
about. But
anyway,
it's been a
but
while since I
I
studied
think,
this, so
I think I just read somewhere a very funny statement that when you get married and you're happy and everything is going fine, that you are a satisfied person. And if you get married and the marriage doesn't work, you become a philosopher.
okay.
That's a quote from Socrates.
Oh, is it?
Okay, all right.
Okay.
You become a
Yeah,
philosopher.
and again, it's sort of that theme fits the idea that Solomon wrote Song of Songs when he was a young man, wrote Proverbs filled with wisdom, in his when he's an adult, and writes Kohelet when he's an old man. I think the author of Kohelet sounds like an old person to me, probably an old man.
Because when you are young, the whole world is open to you. You can,
Mhm.
you see, if you talk to a teenager or a younger man or younger woman, you are indestructible. You
Right.
can do anything. But when middle age or later, and you find all sorts of difficulties, you are how you call it? You're philosophizing.
Philosophical, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Why is this happening to me?
Yes. The Yiddish word for philosopher is kvetch.
Scratch.
Um, okay. So on that kvetchadik note, we will pause and, maybe if we're lucky, we'll finish the article next time and then we can do a deep dive into the text. And, I hope you enjoy coming along on this.
Very,
It's
very much.
it's not easy, but this is, I
we,
think it is
we're
very.
gonna do it in either Hebrew, Greek, or Latin.
I was thinking Aramaic, if that works for
Aramaic.
everybody.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I'll have to see if I can find my Aramaic translation.
Okay.
Um,
Have a good evening,
okay,
Rabbi.
good evening. And
Good night.
Wednesday, our topic is going to be afterlife for animals and heaven for animals. And I got two kind of fun articles to read. Oh, and by the way, for those of you, Cheryl, who want to get into a warmer climate, I'm giving a talk tomorrow night in Camarillo at Temple near Ami as sort of it's part of my interfaith group, kind of explaining Judaism to the interfaith community. So
Yeah, I'll be sure I get on that plane in the morning.
yes, and you don't need that coat. I just want to mention because I think I don't know, in the last few days it's been in the 80s.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, rub it in. Go ahead.
Yep. But now it's getting down. I think it's in the 50s.
That's
And
better.
you
All
know,
right.
and if it gets into the 40s, we've got FEMA on speed dial. I may have to try and find long sleeve shirts. You know, it's really
It's
The
great.
goal here is to
Great.
wear lots of layers.
Yeah.
That's what I
Supposed to
yes.
rain in
do.
So
Santa Barbara
I
tomorrow.
have a hat that covers my whole head.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
And don't
have
wash your car because all of
Right.
our cars are covered in salt.
Right.
Hmm.
Really? Wow.
But today I was in a pool.
you were
Yeah.
in a pool. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? Yes.
Wow.
And the
If-
water was liquid. Is that true?
No, it was warm, in the open place in West Hollywood Park.
Mhm.
It is the fifth.
Okay, we just like to rub it in. On the other hand, you probably spent 3 hours in the car getting there. I'm just trying
If
to.
if you come to Merced, you'll see the almonds in bloom.
Oh wow.
Yeah, well, that's
The
beautiful.
almond trees are in
Wow.
bloom.
So has it been warm?
It's been kind of foggy, but over
Mhm.
the weekend it was sunny and 60s.
And I read, probably should stop the recording. Yeah, let me stop recording.